So often I hear people say, I used to be an introvert, but now I'm an extrovert. Or vice versa. I used to be an extrovert, and now I'm an introvert. In today's video, we're going to dig into why that might be and whether or not that's actually the case. Hey there, my name is Gary Williams. I'm founder and CEO of Better Future International, where I have the pleasure of serving changemakers and getting unstuck using their personality and purpose so that together we can move others to a better future. And I fundamentally believe that knowing who you are, your personality and your purpose is the keys that will unlock so many possibilities for you to go out and to create an incredible change in our world. And I know that knowing your personality can equip you to have that level of self-awareness to do something incredible in the world. And so often I hear people say this idea of I used to be one versus the other when it comes to introversion and extroversion, but I've changed. I've become so much more introverted, or I've become so much more extroverted. So when we're talking about introversion and extroversion, I naturally go to one of my favorite tools called the Myers-Briggs type indicator. A lot of you might know that as MBTI or 16 personality types. I have lots of other videos on this, and I'll link a couple below that might help you dig into it if you're interested in this topic. But here's the deal. As a certified practitioner in this tool, a lot of times people get stuck between introversion and extroversion. And qualitatively, this isn't an exact science, but often I see people get stuck in this idea of introversion versus extroversion as they're growing older. Specifically, when they're in their 20s and beyond, a lot of times we'll start to grow to become more comfortable with what's called the opposite attitude. When we go back to the original framework here of Carl Jung, the idea is we have two different attitudes. No, not like the attitude that teenagers might be giving, but attitudes between the inner and outer world. So introversion is a preference to direct and receive energy from the inner world. And the flip side is true for extroverts. Extroverts prefer to direct and receive their energy to the outer world. And in the framework of Myers-Briggs type indicator, we know that you have a single preference, and that preference doesn't really change over time. So if someone tells you, I used to be an introvert, now I'm an extrovert, they might be becoming more comfortable with directing their focus to the outer world, but usually that preference is still what they're more comfortable with, even though they're stretching themselves and growing and becoming more comfortable in the opposite attitude. So why is this? Well, there's a lot of different theories out there. We don't exactly know 100% for sure, but with the thousands of people that I've worked with different personality tools over the years, I've seen some patterns. So one pattern that I've observed is a lot of times as people are changing environments or considering different contexts in their life, they might be more comfortable with either introverted or extroverted tendencies. And again, it's a preference. We all have access to our inner and outer world, but a lot of times we'll start to direct our attention towards one of them. So for example, when I'm working with people in their early 20s, a lot of times they're going through some major life changes. They're leaving perhaps their homes for the very first time that they grew up in, and maybe they're going out and getting their first job or going out into college, and they're changing their environments. And sometimes that causes us to get a little bit more comfortable in experimenting with the opposite attitude, either our inner or outer world, the opposite of what we actually prefer. Another possible theory or pattern that I've seen out there is when you start digging into the deeper layer of this tool, of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, there's a whole layer underneath called the cognitive functions. And that's just a fancy term that Carl Jung used to describe the way that our minds are wired. And when we're looking at the cognitive functions, you'll see that we all have a unique way that we access the inner world and our outer world. Now, if you're an introvert, if your preference is introversion, directing your energy to the inner world, you're going to lead with a cognitive function that has an attitude that's focused internally. But you also have a handy-dandy sidekick that's focused externally. Now, the flip side is true for extroverts. If you have a preference of extraversion, you're naturally going to have a dominant part of your personality that's focused on the outer world, but you have a sidekick that shows the unique way that you access your inner world. Every single one of us has access to both our inner and outer world. And often what we see is that we start to really lean in and develop that sidekick, or the technical term is the auxiliary cognitive function. And that just means that it's like the sidekick to the superhero of your brain, okay? And when we're looking at that sidekick, as we grow older, we start to learn that we need access to the opposite attitude. So we all need access to our inner and outer worlds, but we start to grow and develop to become more and more comfortable with both of them over time. So does that mean we change our attitudes from introversion to extroversion or vice versa? No, your preference is going to stay the same, but we're likely becoming more aware of our unique way that we access either our inner or outer world, depending on our dominant preference, if we have a preference of introversion or extroversion, and we're becoming more comfortable with that other part, that other world, our inner or outer world, and that's a really good and healthy thing. But remember, it's a sidekick. We don't want the sidekick to take over and to take control, but we do want it to have some space to continue to grow and develop. Now, if this is something that's interesting for you, I would encourage you to check out the comments below. I have some resources to help you dig in and start to see how this might play out for your unique personality type, or some resources to help you discover what your Myers-Briggs personality type might be. So check out the comments below, and I'd love to invite you to do a couple things. In this channel, we're constantly talking about human behavior, creating a change in the world, personality, purpose, and if you're interested in those topics, click subscribe. It's always nice to be able to be notified when we're talking about things that you love to talk about. So click subscribe on this channel. Don't forget to check out the caption below, and I'd love for you to leave a comment. Do you have a preference of introversion or extroversion? Which one's your tried and true preference? And have you noticed that sometimes you're starting to become more comfortable with the opposite attitude? So for example, if you have a preference of introversion, have you noticed that sometimes you might feel like, I wonder if I'm actually an extrovert? And when was that? Did you notice any commonalities or patterns in that? Let's have a conversation below so we can start to dig in and see if we see any other patterns starting to emerge. Hey, thanks so much for joining in today's video. I hope that you know that your preference isn't going to change from introversion to extroversion or vice versa, but really it's just you continuing to grow and develop, which is actually a really good and healthy thing. So thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care, everyone.